Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on metaverse and we have our world famous speaker from around the world, Professor Eric, Professor Rob, Mr. Philippi and Mr. Jason. We also have our friend Mr. Dan. Thank you for joining today's session. First, I would like to give chance Professor Eric how you want to create today's plot for metaverse.
Well, I interviewed Daniel Larimer this week, who he just published a piece that was interesting, an article called "The Legal Status of DAOs." And for those who don't know, a DAOs is kind of the base unit where people in the metaverse collaborate. And one of the things that the DAOs own is just the opinion. What do we think? What do we want to do? And before we came on in the backstage, Rob was talking about what is the metaversal citizenship. And I thought that's pretty interesting because if you don't like your country, you could switch. You don't like the politics of your country in the metaverse, when you talk about the virtual side, you can switch. So when you start connecting the virtual and physical, I'm in San Diego. If I don't like San Diego, maybe I'll just join Riverside and say, they're listening to me in San Diego isn't. But one of the nice things about the metaverse, and Dwayne can attest to that, is how easy it is to set up a group, and the tools are coming. So you don't even need to be experts. I know in a lot of people, like when Dan and Jason and Dwayne got involved in this, anytime you wanted to do something, you had to go program it yourself. And it was non-trivial, just the basic tools. And a lot of them are still buggy. Like the blockchains work good, but a lot of the interfaces to those blockchains are still buggy today. It's amazing how hard it is to do some simple things. But as that's getting easier, it's easier for people to collect. So here's the thing, especially in the US, if you start a metaverse, are you part of a general partnership? Are you held liable? So if we get into, extras minting or something, and we're just part of this group, and somebody sues somebody, are we liable for that? And one of the problems with the legal status in the metaverse is that when people look at things legally, first they try and put things into a framework they already know. Like state and local governments go, we just want to handle this with what we've already built, even though it's not set up to do that. And the other problem is people try and legislate it because they don't like that it's taking away their piece of the pie. It's like, well, I'm invested in, especially like finance, banking, heavily invested. So when somebody tries to do decentralized finance, people get upset. Wait a minute, I want you to use my systems. So a lot of the legislation is trying to get things in there. But the other part of that then is if all you're doing is getting consensus and you don't own anything, can people hold you liable for those people that just getting together to vote? So there's kind of a separation between how we look at property, which is all changing in the metaverse. For example, if you own a crypto coin, you can't really put it in your hand. So do you really own that, or are you owning the opinion that everybody agrees you can use it? So there's this idea of utility versus ownership. And a lot of those questions pop up in the metaverse. So when you come up with a group, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, what kind of group is this? Is this a legal entity like they're doing in states like Wyoming with down LLCs? Are we a partnership? And if so, who are the actual partners and what are we liable for? And you better write it down, because if you're not clear, the government will apply their version of what they think you're doing. And the third thing is, you can actually be a nonprofit. And in many of the states in the US, you can just form that nonprofit. You don't even have to file any paperwork. You just have to document, yes, we are a nonprofit. Here's how we're organized. So I guess number one point, it's very easy to get together. The tools are getting easier. Number two, when you get together, there's a legal status. And then the other point is, you better document what you're doing, because if you don't make it clear, the state will apply their own version of that. And I'm sure Rob will have some very enlightening things about, well, okay, now let's go into trying to add the metaverse to what's already very clear. and legally legislated. And that's the physical trying to add the virtual. So I'm thinking legal, and I'm intrigued with Rob's idea of metaversal citizenship.
Thank you, Mr. Philippi. What the new and interesting information and strategy you want to share with our audience? And that World Talent Economy Forum, we heavily engage with the developing nations. We are trying to uplifting many communities in a smallest communities, those who do not have lot of knowledge, expertise for metaverse and this kind of thing. So how they can get benefit through this process?
Wow, that's a great and really large question. I was going to just follow one just point. I was trying to think of how to follow Eric in talking about legalities, and in this metaverse, and especially in blockchain-based metaverses, it's interesting the evolution, or the at least questions of legalities, and how programmers kind of started with blockchain of thinking that the code would be the law. And in the raw form of these DAOs, you were forming a group and all letting the code be the law. So, for instance, in Bitcoin, we all accept that its code is law. And if you see a transfer of Bitcoin from one address to another, the law says that wherever that Bitcoin is held now, that's the owner, right? And it seems to kind of make sense. And maybe it would be easier for us to all agree on governance if we all agreed on the algorithm. But we have this messy thing called humans, and humans involved in this process. Maybe we're seeing sometimes that maybe there should be a human factor of governance. For instance, maybe that Bitcoin that changed hands, maybe it changed into another account because someone hacked me and moved it, quote unquote, unethically. What kind of governance structure would we need to rectify that? And that's kind of the level of governance that we're at now with these new experiments and Go Fractally, of having that human layer. And then when you have a human layer, we run into a new problem when we come into tech. And the first one is, how do we know that you haven't shown up with multiple accounts? Because now accounts can be semi-anonymous. Maybe you haven't disclosed that this is your account to the world. So how do we make sure that Dwayne hasn't started 10 accounts and is part of this governance process? So one challenge there. And then the second challenge is, how do we surround ourselves with people that a lot of times aren't close to us? We're only meeting like this online. And how do we form some trust in the group, that we trust their opinion? So I'm not saying those questions are 100% answered, but I think it combines with your question of what can we do in local communities and in any communities around the world. The side effect of governance in the metaverse, we're obviously very passionate about it, that we can start practicing these governance systems. And there's new blockchains that are just starting up that reward us for that engagement. So versus, say, maybe a game metaverse where you're rewarded to play, or maybe a commercial metaverse where maybe you're incentivized to give feedback, there's actually a new value system coming out where we can practice with these systems. And I think in a higher level, for us to organize our communities and find what we need, it does at one point come to consensus and governance for us to figure out a way to serve ourselves and the community the best. So you notice a trend here is that you can ask me a lot of questions, Dr. Sharif, and it always comes back to governance for me. So I'll leave it at that. But
Thank you, Professor Rob.
Well, the legalities surrounding the metaverse probably today fall into a couple areas: intellectual property law and copyright law. That's probably what you would use to support or defend your ownership today with regard to the metaverse, since you're dealing with digital information. Also would fall underneath whoever controls the metaverse that you're operating under. And if it's a closed metaverse, which is much of what we see today, where a company controls the environment, be that Facebook or Google or whatever, then it would fall underneath their contracts, whatever contract you agreed to, without reading, as we typically do when we entered that particular environment, and probably find out that Google or Facebook probably owns pretty much everything that goes on in the environment that they created. Now, there's another kind of metaverse called an open metaverse. It's identified by companies like Sandbox. There, the ownership rules are a little bit less certain, and again, it would probably fall under traditional legal constructs like copyright and intellectual property law in terms of ownership. But attesting ownership when you've got multiple people involved in a project can be very difficult if those people are from different companies and different entities. Often, when you're working for a company, that company will own your work product, either regardless of whether you created it during work or after work. Employment contracts are written that way. Then it depends on the country you're in as to whether those clauses are enforceable or not. In some cases, even the state that you're in, with regard to the support of the clauses. So the legalities here, as you are in an open metaverse, are anything but cut and dried, and we'll need some case law, I think, to draw from to determine who owns what. The rules probably should be as it is when you're discussing anything like a project or whatever, to assert ownership early on, because often asserting ownership after the fact, after somebody else has taken what it is you haven't done something with it, can be very difficult, because you have to showcase that you came up with the idea first, and that is well documented. Or if that concept of creation was shared across a number of entities and that relationship hasn't been documented, then it's going to be a litigation nightmare as the court tries to figure this all out. And there aren't a lot of judges that can even begin to understand the nature of the metaverse. When we look at metaverse citizenships, which when I mentioned, I was kind of joking, but it does lead to an underlying concept of at some future point, since the metaverse is kind of coming up in terms of separate, highly delineated walled gardens, much like CompuServe and AOL, where you don't get a lot of movement between them. You could certainly see a construct where you become a citizen of the environment, much like you pay to join a game and play in a game. You're now a member. You're defined by the rules of the game or the environment, and the game and the environment moderators or the mods, as we call them, are the ones that assure your behavior and assure the rules of that particular metaverse are upheld. I think the moderator model seems to be the one that's been popular as we move from environment to environment, though I do notice that it doesn't seem to be playing in the industrial side of metaverse, nor may it need to. On the industrial side, where we are creating digital twins of things for management and control, generally that environment is controlled and owned by whichever company owns the digital twin that is emulating. So BMW, for instance, builds a metaverse for their factory so that they can manage the factory. They will own the content in that metaverse, and they will defend that particular environment aggressively, because what happens in the metaverse in that instance could very well happen in the real world and put a product and people, not necessarily in that order, at risk. And so their need to make sure that rules are followed, safety rules are followed, security rules are followed, would be preeminent and likely dictate what goes on within the industrial metaverse. So no moderators per se, but management wouldn't play the moderator role, much like they do in a real company. And a company, you don't necessarily have moderators unless you look at HR as being a moderating factor, and and management pretty much controls how you behave. And I would expect even if HR was involved, they would play the same role in the metaverse for a corporate instance as they would in real life. In other words, if you've got somebody that's abusing other employees or customers or whatever, you'd be terminated, and your access to that metaverse would be eliminated with your termination. So that's the way, at least it looks like it's coming up at the moment. There's certainly a possibility of having, metaverse countries where you could immerse yourself in a particular environment and kind of stay there. But we're a long way, I think, from the hardware and working through the support arrangements to make that work. I mean, there've been, certainly in science fiction, there've been discussions about using immersion pods with feeding tubes and the rest, and people just kind of checking out into those pods. The Blade Runner book on Blade Runner, which was something to do with electronic sheep, was the name of the book. But in it, the hero's wife had ensconced herself in a pod and just lived in what was then a virtual world, and now we would call the metaverse, and never emerged. And if those things do eventually appear, then you could certainly see that the people in them would probably be citizens, would probably get some say in what went on in the metaverse, much like a homeowners association. God hopes we don't use that model, having been through a couple of those myself. But that's probably the way that it would be approached, only to make sure that the people that were immersed in that metaverse weren't being abused or mistreated. So it's interesting, right at the front end. I imagine if you're into law and computer science, one of the areas to explore would be the rules, the laws, how government should intercede, because you could certainly see situations where a metaverse controlled by a company could become abusive and treat the citizens, the customers of the product abusively, turn them into program elements for TV in order to pay for the service. And because people like conflict, introducing that misery to raise interest and raise advertising revenue, abusing the people, the players in the metaverse as a result. And their government may need to enter and make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen to protect the mental capability of the players. We've certainly seen instances in reality TV where things have gotten out of hand and people have been harmed mentally or physically. And in those cases, government steps in using regular laws that are designed to protect people. Those things would probably need to be moved into the metaverse and provide a way for government to provide oversight, because right now there is no mechanism for government to go in other than as a customer and provide directed oversight in an environment that might have become abusive or harmful. So a lot of area for exploration and for developing case law so that we can deal with the metaverses that are coming, and undoubtedly the abuse that will follow, because unfortunately we are human.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dan.
Thanks, Dr. Sharif, and thank you, everybody. Yeah, I'm still learning and exploring about governance in the metaverse, and I'm glad to be here on these panels and also managing liability in the metaverse. I think that part of it is one of the last things that Rob was saying about how we're humans, and humans, I don't know, tend to get each other in trouble sometimes. I think that a big part of it is just also learning to improve that too, and become better people and kinder people and more helpful for each other. That's something that we're continuing to evolve as humans. And I think that will greatly do, and tools like the metaverse can greatly help us do that over time, although certainly there'll be lots of challenges and we have lots of work to do as people. And then, yeah, I also agree. I think Eric brought up the legal status of DAO's paper that Dan Larimer wrote, and I've been absorbing that quite a lot. Dwayne also mentioned about governance too, and I think or about the focus on governance. And I think there's a lot of helpful details in that paper and that thinking that the faculty team has been doing in terms of making sure to set expectations properly about what people are expecting from the metaverse. And then there's a lot of ideas in the faculty white paper about how opinions are not property, and how communities can govern themselves using the consensus that they come to consensus on the blockchain, and govern themselves with peace and nonviolence. And yeah, there's a lot to say. It's a very big topic, and so maybe I won't ramble too much, but I'm exploring it, and it's a very helpful thing to explore. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in these ideas that we're exploring. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for now, and I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And I think CEO from Extra Van. Can you unmute yourself?
Sorry. So I guess I would have a couple different thoughts on this topic. So to Dwayne's point a minute ago, I'm not sure, and maybe Dwayne can help explain this, but I don't know what the impact of having different accounts are. Is there some negativity or nefariousness that goes along with having different accounts? I guess I would have to have him explain kind of like what the impact of that is, if there is one. Because I don't necessarily immediately see the downside of having multiple accounts. I mean, I have multiple crypto wallets. I think we all do. I think we all should. And some of those are related to my business, and some of those are personal, and so on and so forth, right? So if there is a reason of why, and I'm not sure Dwayne was trying to make this point, but just to dive into that for a second, is why is that a problem, or isn't that kind of to be expected, right? I mean, I have multiple bank accounts, personal. I have multiple IRAs, investment accounts in the traditional financial world. I don't see any necessarily downside, like I said, to having those. I don't know why crypto would be any different. Frankly, I think it would be somewhat foolish to keep all of your crypto in one particular account, right? I mean, we can get into diversification and those sort of arguments separately, right? And do you need to have different accounts to diversify your risk, in that sort of diversification argument, right? So I guess that would be one point that I would just kind of like, bring up to Dwayne, right? Is I guess I would need to be convinced, let's put it that way, of why there's a downside there. But anyway, I think the other point that I wanted to make real quick was to Eric comments a few minutes ago about the legality and so forth, and how does the real world, if you will, and the digital world combine, right? And so for us, at LD2, I mean, we have a very acute sensitivity to that. Let's put it that way, right? Because we are taking people's money, crypto, and giving them a physical assets for it. So on that point, like I said, what that Eric was saying earlier, we have a legal framework that we use, right? I mean, the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code, is the contract that people enter into when they purchase our product, right? And we have all those terms delineated and explained on our website because that is exactly the contract they're entering into. And there wasn't a good legal precedent to how that gets adjudicated, before my father's case, right? But the precedent that came out of the federal judge in that case basically said that, yes, I mean, these are binding contracts, even though they're digital. So that creates the framework for how our customers can have some sort of recourse if we were to go out of business. So I'm not sure that's more universal, Eric, to your point. But I mean, that is the reality that we work in. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jason.
Thank you. Thanks for all the panelists and their comments so far. I'll try to put some of the points together, because bridging the traditional jurisdictional world of law with the global digital metaverse. I'll answer Extra's question first, in that Dwayne's point was about the accounts you use to manage your assets as a property manager or as an investment manager. Dwayne was talking about the accounts that you use as your identity tool. So it was just a contextual sort of misunderstanding. I think that Dwayne was making the argument to say that you shouldn't have multiple accounts for your assets. He was saying that for governance purposes, it's important that a person is proven to be themselves, right? Is that they are who they say they are before they sign, before they vote. That's an essential ingredient in the mix of governance. And that's true in the traditional world as well as the digital world. As we know, digital identity tools are just a competitive field, because there are more than one way to create an identity tool. And the original passport came from the private sector. It was a Dutch company. I think many of the panelists probably already know the story of the reason for trustlessness in the world of global identity. When there are nations that do not trust each other, then there is a problem recognizing each other's identity tools. And there's a problem, contestation about their citizenship ranks, about who is a citizen and what their status is. And so the best answer to
And then we lose Sharif. Eric, why don't you pick it up? I think Jason's going to drop. Why don't you pick it up from there? And Eric, you're muted.
Yeah. So, Jason brought up this point that started out with people thinking code is law. Well, of course, you have to be able to legally put things into code for it to be law. But a lot of this is about opinions and decision making and things that have to do with how people get together and agree to do things. And as you go to disperse things over a global scale, I've never met anybody here in person. Actually, I've known Dr. B for a long time. I've never met him in person either. So as we start meeting all these people, there's this idea, of trust and trustlessness. So a lot of the metaverse says because you can't use a smart contract unless you put this idea into code. And as soon as you do that, then things have to be specific. So a lot of times in our legal world, I promise Rob and Dan I'm going to do something, and then I don't do it, and then there's damage to Rob and there's damage to Dan, and the courts have to kind of decide what that is. Well, a lot of the legal aspects in the metaversal world and the blockchain world is, well, no, that's in code. For example, if I go book an airline flight right now, I can show up and all of a sudden my flight isn't there. I've had that happen before. And hotel rooms, you book a hotel room and you show up and your hotel room isn't there. Well, in a lot of the blockchain world, you have to say that if I have a hotel room and I put it up, then that room is gone. You can't book it multiple times because, the code says the transaction in the blockchain is, Rob now has this room, so I can't sell it to Extra. And Extra, on the other hand, says I have this money that's reserved for the room. And so a lot of comes with the proof of work and it changes hands. So I think if you're looking for a nice profession that's going to make money, I think auditing smart contracts could be it in the future. Because when you try and put these things out, you don't go to court afterwards and promise. This is where it's spelled out, and it's going to do that. One is you need to make sure that's legal in the first place. But the second thing, if it is, it's just going to happen. And there's much less room of saying, well, what were the conditions for getting my hotel room and I didn't get it, and what are the damages? And so you really need to think about what's going to be delivered, what are the cases where it's going to be delivered, and what are the consequences if that doesn't happen, because the code is just going to execute it. The other challenge becomes when you look at, we're having a big time, hard time, challenging time right now figuring out how to handle social media, which is definitely dividing people, and people start hate groups and destroy people. And, what are the legalities of that? We're trying to get that now. It gets worse when I can have all these identities and I can come up and start a hate group that goes after, anybody here in one identity, and, it can even be anonymous. So, what is the role of the truth of information in legality? So those are other issues.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Philippi.
Yeah, it's. I think we all agree metaverse is a large term, and so most of my interactions have been on that play to earn and gaming front, and I anticipate that to be a really big growing industry, because video gamers already understand a little bit of the tech. Depending what sort of games people have played, they understand that they have, some tools and equipment and some assets. Usually before the metaverse, it was owned by a centralized company. So coming now over to the metaverse, I see one legal change that is kind of being put into the metaverse. Before with crypto, there was always this question of, is this a security or not? Even as just a passive individual, not an accredited investor, if I'm buying a token, what is my interest in that token? And as a simple person, I think it seems pretty clear to me, if I'm buying something and just doing nothing else and holding it and hoping it goes up in price, this is just Dwayne's definition, okay? But I would think that seems like an investment. And I see a lot of these, what used to be an investment or just buy the token, are really trying to drive utility. And it's hard to tell if they're trying to drive utility to get around the securities laws, or if they're really trying to drive utility to build a community and trying to, create some value and trying to capture attention from a bunch of people. So it is this interesting new world in the gaming metaverse where the utility is being more and more obvious, that a lot of these games that they are, they do start with a centralized group of people in some company that is holding some IP. They might say they're giving their whole game to the community and it's open source, but there's still liability and they're still having to protect the way they interact. So I think it's an incredible time for people to find out what you value, because these metaverses now need utility. They need your attention and they need your action. And we can actually drive what some of those actions and participation are, right? If it was just an investment, there's probably not much more than buying something and hoping it goes up and hoping that the person you sell it to, you're dumping your bag on them. You're making some money. In this new world of play to earn that has these, starting to have layers of governance on it. Yeah, I think the opportunity is just to get involved, because at this stage, not only is your participation and attention rewarded, you can, with a small group of people, come up and think of some other actions that would produce value for yourself in the game. So it's not it's kind of like starting a business by yourself while you're having, a whole bunch of other small business people support you because they all have the same interest in making this metaverse or this game work. So I think for anyone tuning in these early days, there's enough of these metaverses and games that are paying you to learn them and pay attention. And there's probably quite a few opportunities for us to find more exciting and rewarding things to do in these metaverses. So there is almost a two-way interaction that your opinions are valued.
Thank you, sir. Professor Rob.
Well, there's no one metaverse yet, and there may never be. So the difficulty is, at least with regard to rules of governments, who owns or controls the metaverse that you're in, and what are the rules, and then again, who enforces them? Because rules without enforcement aren't rules at all. The interesting question of whether a cryptocurrency is a security or not. The United States, at least, has ruled it is not. It's not a security because it doesn't convey any rights to control. It's not like a stock where you gain a right to control the entity by virtue of the stock. Though I would point out by that same argument, Facebook stock isn't stock either, because Zuckerberg, the way they've constructed it, Zuckerberg is the sole proprietor, and none of the stockholders have any control over what Facebook does as a result. Only Zuckerberg does. But that's a whole different argument. The government has ruled the cryptocurrency is more of a commodity. They treat it as if it was a foreign currency, and so the same rules and regulations that govern, at least they believe the same rules and regulations that govern commodities and futures trading would govern cryptocurrency. I don't think we have enough case law here to know if that's going to hold up yet, but that at least is where the U.S. government is leaning. I'm not sure about any other governments. And clearly we're talking about the metaverse, but cryptocurrency and the metaverse do play certain roles together in that one would be a natural currency in the other, and clearly we're going to need at some particular point, if we just decide to merge these metaverses, some common means of trade. And well, that could be the U.S. dollar again, which is the common means of common currency in the world at the moment. There's certainly a lot of effort to try to remove the U.S. dollar from that role and replace it with something else, with the possibility of that something else being some form of cryptocurrency. Of course, right now cryptocurrency is kind of underneath the cloud due to how volatile it's been. So we'll see what happens. It's not the sparkling jewel that it was even 6 months ago. Largely because so many people lost so much money recently in cryptocurrency. So we'll see what happens. It's Brazil, I think, is going to be a great case, since they've adopted that currency as part of the government. So far, that's not working out well for them. But there's not a lot of things in Brazil that are working out at the moment. So they kind of stand in line for what trouble they're going to have next. So back to metaverse and governance. The interesting thing is going to be how do we assure the stuff that we create we retain some ownership of. And here I'm thinking like you put in your work to create a digital twin of something, be it yourself, a house, your pet, or whatever. As of right now, chances are if you place that in a metaverse, the ownership of that item is going to transfer to whoever owns that metaverse. There is no clear, to my knowledge, at least in the closed metaverses, there is no clear delineation that specifies that you get any ownership rights of the environment just because you contributed to it. Much like if you create your own variants of a video game, you don't get ownership of any part of that video game. In fact, you give up those rights when you create the video game. Same thing with fan content. You create a fan movie connected to the Marvel universe, assuming you don't get sued. You cannot make any money from that. You get no ownership rights from that creation. And at least right now, it looks like that's the same kind of thing that would happen in the metaverse. Now that's a problematic, particularly if you talk about human digital twins, because human digital twins are coming up. We do have companies now in place helping people create them. And yeah, they're kind of more like scripts at the moment, where they only do a few things, but they'll evolve, and so will the tools. And at some particular point in time, that digital twin will be able to do much of what you can do, at least electronically. Granted, it's not going to change your tire for you, but in terms of putting out reports, filling out forms, responding to queries, those kinds of things the digital twin will be able to do. And so you can imagine a situation where you could train your digital twin. The company says, hey, it's now doing 90% of your job. We don't need you anymore. We're just going to duplicate your digital twin 30 million times. And that's going to be our new staff. Have fun in unemployment. And now we're running the company on your intellectual property. That could be a problem, and a fairly severe one if we don't attribute ownership rights and carry back things like royalties to the creator of the digital twin to assure that the creation is well funded. We do have mechanisms for that, though I should point out in terms of patents. Generally, if you create a patent for a company, the company owns that patent. You do not. You might receive an award for doing it and some recognition. I've seen patent boards. Pretty much every company I ever worked for, but those people don't retain any economic rights to the patent. The company says you created the patent while you're working for us. We own the patent, that would be all right, I guess, if you're an employee and you agreed to that. The issue then comes back though. If you create a digital twin of yourself as an employee, should not in fact some of the sustained revenue from that digital twin flow back to you, since in effect you're training a replacement that will earn no income and may in fact displace you. That could be problematic, and I expect unions will weigh in here pretty heavily once they figure out what's going on, and we may have a future where we have digital twins, human digital twins, that are active members in unions and might even pay dues. Might be a concept for a book at some particular point in time. So a lot of things are going to be decided over the next 50 years as this stuff advances in terms of ownership rights. What happens to the intellectual property that's created, whether it will fall under existing rules or whether we're going to need new rules. I favor the latter. I think we're going to need a significant overhaul of intellectual property rules to assure that the people that create things like human digital twins are compensated adequately for that creation, so they're not disadvantaged and abused. And companies do tend to do that. They will take advantage of contributors. And there needs to be preventions put in place to assure that doesn't happen, because we have had that experience in the past with physical facilities. So interesting time.
Can I add something real quick, Rob? I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but I know this space a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think that if you go back and look at what the SEC just said in their last guidance and so forth, they have said that cryptos are securities.
The last I have is SEC Chairman Jay Clayton said no. He said cryptocurrencies are a replacement for sovereign currencies, or replace the dollar, the euro, the yen with Bitcoin. So the ruling, the official ruling, unless there's something that overruled the SEC Clayton, is that it's a commodity. It's not a security. It's a commodity. It's treated like other currencies.
You should go read their guidance on the Coinbase case and so forth, where they said that the cryptocurrencies did meet all the problems of the test, and so they specifically delineated seven cryptos that were securities. So.
Maybe, but as I say, I'm not looking at the 2021 ruling, and again, the 2021 ruling says no. It absolutely not. In fact, if you just look up is cryptocurrency
this was a month ago
a security, all the top items say no. Just a general search on Google, is cryptocurrency says no. In fact, right now no. So I hear you.
I said a month ago.
One other thing
they just came out with new guidance saying
on
that
the duplicate. Okay.
Look
fair enough.
So
I'm just saying that's not.
I don't want to get in an argument. I mean, it is what it is, and part of it has no's because we had a lot of pushback with our product about people describing it as security and so forth, and how did it relate to the prongs of the Howey test, right? So, like I said, there is new guidance from the SEC saying that cryptos are a security, and I know that flies in the face of the proposed law in the Senate about having the CTFC, be the regulator for all of cryptos, right? And so I don't think there's any clarity here. But shared earnings, shared upside, all the three prongs of Howie do seem to suggest that crypto are securities in a lot of instances, because they're essentially a proxy for equity, in those companies, right? So if the company does well, then the token goes up. So to say that, and again, there's no clarity here, because the CTFC argues with the SEC, right? And so forth. But anyway,
I feel as though we've stolen it from Dr. Sharif. I don't want to
I apologize. I just wanted to respond to Rob's comment specifically. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dan.
Maybe it's
cool. Actually. I'm sorry. Was that Jason?
I should have been muted.
Mr. Dan.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, Dr. Sharif. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. So I think I mean, just about what Extra and Rob were talking about with securities, I think that it's a responsibility of people who are involved with the blockchain industry and cryptocurrency space to both engineer our systems and tokens and so forth in ways that protect communities operating from securities laws. In a lot of cases, securities laws are quite outdated and not in the best interest of humanity or society or communities as a whole. So it's our responsibility to advocate for why these are beneficial for society and also upgrade legacy laws related to securities and so forth. So we have to be careful and be mindful and aware of the current regulations and so forth, and work both within those regulations as much as possible, but then at the same time, like, ultimately we have to do what's best for our communities and what's best for our society and what's best for humanity and so forth. And like, the amount of laws is increasing exponentially. Like, lots of smart people, like for example Elon Musk, has talked about the amount of laws increase exponentially over time. I think I'm doing that in the wrong direction like that. And there's no real mechanisms for society to like remove most laws, and they constrain society. And so a big responsibility that we have is like explaining why, even if some tokens might fit under some securities laws by some definitions, that what we're really aiming to do as a society is just make the best experience possible for everybody in the society. And so if we need to update some laws to do so, or remove some laws to do so, then that's something that we'll probably need to do in the coming years and decades to accommodate for communities using these helpful new technologies.
Thank you. Mr. Jason?
Thank you. Yeah, there are many non-investment things that appreciate. And hedge funds are known sometimes to acquire certain items that are not securities. They're just commodities, or they're just items that the hedge fund manager speculates will appreciate. And, I mean, the asset is an intrinsic asset. It has no underlying business. It has no underlying staff. It has no underlying accountability, and it has no handle on it as a facet of ownership. So truly, it's just an intrinsic asset is the correct understanding of it from a technical perspective for what ownership really issues for most types of digital currency. And I think that has been made clear for those who have examined it carefully. When there is an underlying business and the asset acquired comes with governance power, then we're starting to apply the Dewey test to evaluate whether that asset is a security. And securities are good things when they are that. I mean, I think it's important to remember that this is an innovative field where new things are being created, and those new things present a major challenge to our understanding of the instrumentation of finance. Like there are so many different ways a person can pay, right? With a check or with a money order or with an electronic transfer or using metal coins or using paper notes. And that in the world of finance, regulation really is everything. Like whatever is decided to be allowable in the way of legal tender and use of legal tender and use of property, away from the world of contraband, etc. Then, I mean, that is the definition of the economy pretty much at the outset. And so, unfortunately, I didn't even finish my first point. I froze my first point. I almost froze again now. But I wanted to speak to some of Rob's points made earlier about intellectual property and the royalties, legacy royalties of the future aftermarket effects of people making a digital twin, people buying and selling it, and the potential for appreciation or use in future media. We already have some of that, but again, it's just a thorny issue when viewed at a global stage, because even intellectual property is a jurisdictionally enforced concept, right? It's a concept that exists by jurisdiction per jurisdiction, and it's contentious. The greatest favor, perhaps, that anybody could do to relieve this tension is to provide methodologies, to provide a competitive field of alternative methodologies that that people can participate in, and we can get a real world example of their starting point to ending point. Everything else is hypothetical, We're examining two possible futures here, and we're doing it all in the abstract of like that's possible and that's possible and that's aside. And well, it'd be nice if we had a dry run out there somewhere in the world, wouldn't it? Probably a few. And the world of intellectual property, the world of identity, technology, they're exciting, and their excitement comes as like a form of nervousness for how important it is, and as well as how difficult it actually is to get it right. I mean, I think I'll just summarize by saying the legal status of DAOs has a very bright future in its way, in front of it, in the way of helping bridge the divides between places that jurisdictionally cannot agree otherwise and cannot cooperate otherwise, like providing a strong identity tool that is trustless enough for all parties to depend upon the legitimacy of its use, like that when a person uses it, for sure that they are who they say they are. That takes stress and pressure and difficulty out of the system for those nations that are experiencing those difficulties, and then they can maybe focus their scarce amount of effort and resource to problems that are more solvable for them. I'm usually not one to advocate the privatization of the commons. But when a nation does its own citizenship passport governance technology, I think it still has to do that. I think that it comes as a compliment that they should match. It should come in addition to, rather than in place of, obviously. For like a good while, just for that real world example. Just as the Dutch passport company did at the origin of it, when nations would issue crests to families to identify their citizens, there was a difficulty there because across European borders, the crest that came from one nation might not be trusted or known. And traveling was tough to prove that you are who you say you are when traveling outside your own country. And so it took a private sector effort to bridge that gap, realistically, to provide a technology of identity that everybody could rely on and everybody knew of, regardless of jurisdiction. Thank you for that. Thank you for the comments
Thank
earlier.
you, thank you, thank you. I have to go for the concluding remarks. First, I request Mr. Philippi for the concluding remarks for today's session.
Yeah, just really thankful for the great conversation, and it's these systems by themselves are interesting, but it's always I like what you're saying, Jason, about the real world examples of smashing the real world and its inherent in laws it has with this new metaverse, right? And yeah, everything we're doing right now in the form of governance and tokens is so early, and so many experiments is that's what it is. And I guess the opportunity is that there's enough of these experiments going on to find what you like within these metaverses and start experimenting, right? It's kind of anybody tuning in right now. It's almost like the early days of the internet. So pat yourself on the back, and you are kind of ahead of the curve to join this experiment. And it's interesting that this experiment comes with these complex issues like tokenomics and governance, right? And that there's enough value in these systems that we're being paid to participate to in these experiments. So I just urge everyone to come join. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you. This is excellent discussions. Professor Rob, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Well, the metaverse, remember, is not a thing. It's multiple things at the moment, and still in its infancy. I did want to address one other thing that came up with regard to multiple accounts and where multiple accounts could become a problem. Certainly multiple accounts being used to diversify your investment portfolio or to keep your business and your personal interests separate for tax reasons would be a viable reason to have multiple accounts. A bad reason to have multiple accounts would be because you wanted to catfish somebody and get their money. You wanted to convince them that you were a 12-year-old boy when you were not. There's the problem with regard to multiple accounts, and it really follows the overall governance over whether or not you're behaving appropriately or not. And one of the reasons why a number of the social networks have required validation that you are who you are is to make sure there's some kind of recourse if you do something you shouldn't be doing. In other words, if you are harming someone else, stealing from them or whatever, you shouldn't be able to hide behind a facade of a fake account to do so. So there's where the multiple accounts, and particularly if it comes to governance and you're talking about a democratic process, having multiple accounts would be problematic because suddenly you've got 1,000 votes where somebody else may only have one, and you subvert the effort. So multiple accounts become a problem like anything. If they're used for an illicit purpose, they aren't a problem if they're not used for an illicit purpose. It really comes down to the purpose they're used and the nature of the damage that's done. And there lies the difficulty. With regard to the human digital twins and long-term interests, I kind of wonder if the model that we shouldn't explore is that of residuals for actors. An actor is paid to in a program or a movie, but they're also paid again during reruns or replays of that program or movie. They take an interest in the overall revenue long term, and that's probably what should happen here as well. You should get some type of residual interest in the creation of whatever you do, as long as that creation is done as an independent entity or under a contract that defines that, much like it is with an actor. But remember, extras don't get paid that way. If you're an extra in a number of movies, myself, you don't get your residuals. You're lucky you get lunch. And so under those conditions, you could certainly see that there could be abuse of this capability. If in fact it was done broadly and people that were creating these things simply weren't getting paid. I do think it's going to rise. It's going to assure that we have some type of union-like entity for the long term, so that people can collectively be protected as insurance, because no individual, no matter how powerful, can run against a multinational and hope to win long term. They can just run you out of money with attorneys. But a union, a collection of people then can stand against that multinational and surface similar resources and then defend the rights of the individual. So that hasn't happened yet, but I do expect at some particular point a union or several unions will get involved here to provide that collective bargaining structure to assure that people's rights are maintained. My fear, of course, is that will only happen after a whole crap load of people are abused first. But that's the way we apparently do things, not proactively, retroactively, historically. I do want to leave on one other thing of whether cryptocurrency is a commodity or a security. Extra was right that the current ruling by at least the current position by the head of litigation for the SEC is that their argument is a security this round. But as I mentioned before, it's the head of the SEC that's indicated that is not, and certainly the head of litigation would be subordinate to the head of the SEC. Having said that, I think it does point that this is something that is in flux. And tomorrow they could very well rule as an organization that it is in fact a security, since it's going to be pretty hard for them to argue in court. It's one thing and then argue from the corporate office that it is something else. If they want to win a case, they probably need to be a little bit more consistent in terms of their rulings. So the trend looks like it is towards a security at this point, but who knows? This is case law that has not yet been established yet, and the court has not, to my knowledge, ruled definitively on one way or the other. And that ruling could very well define that at least the current delineation of crypto between security and currency. And another court could rule very differently. We are not at a Supreme Court level here, so the case law, even if it's created, is going to be relatively weak until somebody challenges at a Supreme Court, and that's in the United States. We've got similar courts in most countries, and they would in turn have to reach similar rulings unless one of the world organizations steps in and says, "Hey, this is the way it's going to be." So it's an interesting place to be in. Certainly not one I would want to be in litigation in at the moment, because when you've got this level of flux, it makes litigation incredibly expensive because you're just hoping and praying the judge agrees with you without a case law foundation to assure the outcome that you want. So exciting times, and I imagine the metaverse is going to be surrounded by exciting times. And at some future point, we may even have court hearings that are in the metaverse to discuss metaverse elements. Reality TV holds your breath, but things are undoubtedly going to get a lot more interesting over the next few decades.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir. Mr. Dan, what's your concluding remarks?
Great points and great conversation. Thank you, everybody. I'll also echo what Dwayne said, encouraging people to participate in the metaverse and just see what you think is most exciting and most enjoyable. That's a big part of it too. Just like just kind of letting your heart I'll lead you, I guess, so to speak, with whatever seems like it's most helpful and fun to do. And there's a lot of really great things going on with the metaverse, and we'll figure out the legal side to accommodate for everybody to enjoy their experience as we go along. I'm looking forward to helping with that, and have enjoyed the discussion. So thank you very much. I'm not sure if Rob was speaking. I couldn't hear you though. I think you might have been muted. It might have just been me.
I was talking to my wife.
Okay.
That was it.
If I may for one moment, Rob, I wasn't trying to be antagonistic or difficult to your point, right? Because I do think that the point is that it hasn't been adjudicated in a way that is clear, right? And
I'm okay.
the SEC can say whatever they want, right? And the fact that there is now a new bill in front of the Senate that says that the CTFC is going to be in charge of all crypto, I don't think that is the best solution either, because I don't think that a lot of the cryptos are commodity futures, right? And in the very nature of the CTFC, adjudicates and regulates, should I say? So anyway, I was just trying to point out that that there was a new opinion by the SEC, about what the reality is and how does that relate to the Howey test, that's clearly been set.
Right. I understand. That's fine.
And if you go back to like just one last comment, if you read the the decision by the Supreme Court as it relates to Alice versus CLS, in terms of how do digital patents be defined. They created a much different standard than the Diamond case did in 81. So that's really the new standard. And the fact that, and I only know this because I do a lot of patent work myself and own, a company that has patents that were related to financial services and so forth. So I hope that gives you a little bit of context of, where I'm coming from. If you can appreciate that.
I do. Thank you.
So.
Well, while we're waiting for Sharif to come back, let's move past final comments.
Yeah, did he drop? His internet dropped, eh?
Yeah, your turn.
Of course, sure. I mean, one of the other issues that was raised earlier was about I guess I'll stay on the same thread. Commodity versus security, because not all digital assets are one or the other. There's an STO out there, right? There was a concept and a push for STO, which is like a secure token offering, a token that is a DAO governance tool that is a corporation with business in it that really does belong to securities in there and nowhere else. Right? So just because the form of blockchain is the format, that in no way determines the nature of the asset. Truly, it does not, right? The home base of it existing on a blockchain can be a big money. Can be a commodity in a more fixed way. I mean, Extra's project really is as being a pure commodity as possible. I mean, its underlying asset is a commodity to begin with, right? And that, but his business, if we're going to invest in business, that's separate than investing in the product of that business. Right? Oh, got background. Is that Dr. Sharif? Welcome back. We noticed you're back.
Thank you. This is excellent discussion. Hopefully it will be very helpful for our audience. I just want to share a great news from World Talent Economy Forum. You know that World Talent Economy Forum are working with the developing nations and many countries in Asia Pacific, North America, and Europe. Tomorrow we have a very, very important sessions, especially it will be offline. Actually, we are organizing sessions with iUniversity Japan. The president of iUniversity Japan, Dr. Ichiya Nakamura, he is actually arriving Malaysia. We are operating from Malaysia. After 2 weeks, we will be operating from South Asia. So Dr. Ichiya Nakamura, one of the best scientists from Japan, he's president of iUniversity. His team actually working with World Talent Economy Forum. We are helping Malaysian government and Malaysian local ecosystem to develop a knowledge-based ecosystem. This is one of the biggest platform in Japan. 250 corporations working together, as well as MIT and Stanford. They are also supporting this ecosystem, and all of the students, they are actually developing companies, developing corporations. So we are helping this iUniversity to growing with the developing nation students and the youth community, and we are collaborating together. Then from Japan, more than 3,000 scientists actually supporting World Talent Economy Forum initiative. Through this process, hopefully we can develop a huge knowledge-oriented communities in Asia Pacific. Thank you all of our speakers to supporting our initiative. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Malaysian time, We have a special session with the president in offline. We have campus in Philo Damansara. We have campus in International Islamic University, Brighton International Schools. So these 2 days will be very, very interesting offline sessions for the youth communities in Japan. Thank you all of our speakers, Professor Robs, and all of the speakers, Mr. Dan, Mr. Philippes, and Mr. Jason for joining today's sessions. Hopefully, with your collaboration, we can develop world largest knowledge-oriented society in Asia Pacific. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, if you help me, we want to organize a session just for our media and promotion purpose.
Share it around.
Yeah.
Thank you for hosting, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much. See you later.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.